Okay, we're going live. We're gonna stop sharing. Okay, Burton.
Welcome, everyone, to the Harvard Graduate School of Design's Fabrication Lab Speaker Series. My name is Burton Leggett, and I'm a staff member in the Fabrication Lab. This is the third event in our fall semester series, and these events have been an interesting departure for us, with classes being held remotely and our usually busy lab spaces sitting dormant. We have had the opportunity to, and really needed to, pursue other ways to keep the conversations we normally have informally in the lab alive and vibrant. And this is one of the ways we've attempted to do that. I've worked in the Fabrication Lab for 9 years and have seen many groups of students cycle through the school in that time. And I've had many conversations that reference similar themes with both students, staff, and faculty. One I would like to focus on today is how design and fabrication inform each other. I think it is rare to find an individual who truly excels at both. Many people are capable of extremely bold design, but need collaborators to bring those designs to life and introduce a sense of practicality to an otherwise impossible or unrealistic proposal. Others are incredibly skilled in realizing someone else's designs, but struggle to break free from tradition when designing themselves. Those with the ability to both imagine freely and funnel their designs into practical and in many cases marketable finished products are unique. And finding and maintaining that balance is something that is constantly on my mind, both in my own work and when working with students in the lab. Today, I would like to examine that balance of design and fabrication through the work of our panel of guitar builders. Each of these builders is working somewhat outside of traditional forms and are pushing the boundaries of what we expect from a guitar. They are also building these guitars and are primarily working alone as the sole fabricator of their designs. They are also, and I think I can say this without too much hyperbole, some of the most successful and respected guitar builders working today, and it's really an honor to have them here speaking with us. As such, they have brought with them a large audience of fellow guitar builders and enthusiasts that we do not usually attract, and we have many more people in attendance today than usual. So I'd like to say welcome to all of you and thank you for attending. In looking through the registration list this week, I saw many names who could easily have been on this panel as well. With that contingent from the guitar world here, I'd like to give context to what I'm imagining are two distinct groups in attendance here today. For those from the guitar world, the Graduate School of Design is focused primarily on the built environment and offers degrees in architecture, landscape architecture, urban planning, urban design, and other related disciplines. We do not offer degrees in industrial design, graphic design, or product design, although the work of the school certainly touches on these disciplines on occasion. Much of the work that occurs in our fabrication lab is representative in nature and not necessarily one-to-one in scale or even performative in any way. There is also more involved work like prototype work, material and process research, and work on all kinds of custom projects. And we are always concerned with issues of materiality, technology, process, health and safety, and craft. In support of that broad array of work, the lab is well resourced to be flexible in response. We have a little bit of everything and are not too highly specialized in any one direction, while still recognizing that a specific type of architectural model making is the most common type of making we support. We have traditional wood, metal, and machining resources, as well as laser cutters, CNC routers, 3D printers, and scanners, knife cutting machines, vacuum forming, and even some robotics. We've got all the toys. For our attendees from the GSD, who may have limited experience with guitars and likely no experience with their construction, the guitar and similar stringed instruments offer an extremely complex design challenge. These instruments are traditionally made from highly variable natural products, yet the builder is tasked with forming those materials into a system that requires machinist-level precision in certain areas. The entire structure is under tension, and well-made and sensitive instruments are commonly built right on the edge of implosion from the force exerted by the strings. The shapes of these instruments have strong historical precedent, and moving too far beyond the established forms can remove or alter the intrinsic power of the archetypes we recognize. A well-made instrument also requires a tremendous amount of skill to construct. Each joint and material choice is important to the larger structure, and well-made instruments require the entire system to be in balance with itself. The musical instrument is also a tool, and in many cases is made specifically for an individual who may have requirements for tone or ergonomics. The builder must have enough control of this complex system to be able to alter it to fit the needs of the customer's desires, which, especially when dealing with the sound of the instrument, can be extremely subjective. I work in the fabrication lab and love being a part of the vibrant community we have. I also build guitars, and I'm in my home shop now, which you can see behind me. Having a foot in both worlds, I think the craft of guitar making and solo instrument making in general offers a unique design challenge that is very applicable to much of the more complex work students are pursuing in the fabrication lab, as well as providing a strong example of the necessity of the balance between design and fabrication, especially so with the group we have assembled today. I'm excited to be having this conversation. To get started, I'd like to introduce our panelists, and then we will hear from each of the guitar builders who will speak for a bit about their work and process. We'll follow that with a discussion among the panelists and open up the discussion to questions from the audience for the last 20 to 30 minutes. The chat function is disabled, but questions can be submitted, and I will be able to see them and relay them to the panel as the conversation progresses. Our first panelist is Rochelle Rosencrantz. Rochelle is a musician and instrument builder working out of Providence, Rhode Island. She is also a lecturer at RISD, teaching spatial dynamics, and incorporates instrument making into some of her classes. I have been following her work in person and on Instagram and have been extremely interested in some of her recent work involving biomaterials adapted to her instruments. Mishi Matsuda is a guitar maker working out of Redwood City, California. Mishi makes around 7 guitars a year, and of those 7, designates 1 or 2 to be special projects, to be set apart from his more traditional work. Even his more traditional work is obviously his own, and he has developed a unique visual aesthetic, immediately recognizable as his own. He is regarded by many in the guitar community to be a singular builder, and his work defies easy characterization. Ken Parker builds hybrid archtop guitars out of his shop in Gloucester, Mass. He previously operated Parker Guitars, making the iconic Parker Fly guitar, and incidentally, it was former employees of Parker Guitars who shepherded our GSD fabrication lab into its current configuration. I have an anecdote about Ken that I think is applicable here. Years ago, I was at a guitar making conference and was attending a workshop by a well-respected repairman, Dan Erlewine, and he was presenting on metalworking for the guitar shop. Someone asked in that workshop about making tuning machines and milling the small gears. And Dan said, "Oh God, nobody does that. It's much too complicated. We don't have to get into that." And no one seemed bothered by the answer to that question. I walked from that workshop directly into Ken's, which immediately followed next door. And one of the very first images Ken showed was his lathe set up cutting a worm gear for a replacement machine on a bass that he'd been repairing. And it was my first introduction to just one of the many ways that Ken is one or maybe a few steps ahead of many of the rest of us. His knowledge of guitars, instrument history, and fabrication processes is vast, and his work is a touchstone for many of the other builders working today. Uli Teufel has been building his signature electric guitars from his shop in Germany for the last 20 plus years. He is currently building 4 models, and one of which, the Birdfish, is celebrated not only in the guitar world, but also by galleries that otherwise specialize in mechanical and horological objects. Uli's shop is extremely well resourced, and his control of the entire process, even including making the small hardened stainless screws necessary for his custom hardware, is a detail very few other guitar builders integrate into their work. Uli's industrial design degree and study under Hartmut Esslinger informs his current work and approach to instrument building. And Jamie Gale is a curator, consultant, and retailer within the custom guitar world. His boutique guitar show was likely the only viable guitar show to find a way to bring people and guitars together in this last very strange year. He and I have had many conversations leading up to this one, and from our very first chat, we have discussed the intersection of the design world and guitars. Jamie also has a broad understanding of the larger guitar world, and I'm very glad to have him here today. So with all of that, let's begin. And I'd like to begin with Rochelle and give her some time to introduce what she's currently working on and her processes. So.
Well, hello, everybody, and thank you for having me. It's really fun to be among everyone here. And also to the students, I'd like to say, I'm pretty impressed that you didn't take like a year off and you decided to keep going despite the difficulty of 2020. And I think as creative people, it shows your drive. So I like that. So here we are in Providence in my wood shop, which is very simple. It's just one room where I have my machines on one side, my hand tools just behind me, and my mold and also wood on the other side. So the workbench is right in the middle and everything gravitates. The last couple of years, I've been mostly focusing on biomimicry and also biomaterials. Those, as designers, you must have heard that term very often, but in the guitar world, it's still like fairly new. So for those who don't know what's biomimicry, it's when mechanically you apply what you learn from nature and see an application actually for what you're working on. Like for example, this is a 3D part of a resonator that will become a guitar, and those are inserts. I was washing my dishes one day and I cleaned a porcelain bowl and it resonated. I'm like, oh my God, what if a resonator could be made in porcelain instead of looking like a pasta strainer, often with metal, and what shape should that take? And so yeah, I started to look at things that resonate in nature, because nature with evolution, you have millions of years of design and research already done. So there's a lot of things like we can learn from that. So seashells structure, also the inner ear structure, but because I choose to use ceramic, bone structure can also give me some lesson on how to deal with stress and pressure. And this is pretty much the shape that I ended up coming up with. And that would never have happened if not because of biomimicry. Biomaterials are different. The biomaterials don't mimic what nature does. You use nature um, to almost produce your material, to fabricate with you. I have on my workbench Mycelium Mushroom. So this is pretty much what you start with. A bunch of dried corn husk, farm waste, and you grow a mushroom that's going to fill the voids, all the interstitial spaces. We all know that sound travels through air, and being similar to what natural polystyrene would be, that's very conducive to sound. You can grow it really fast. It takes only 3 weeks. It looks a little bit like a granola bar, but it resonates pretty well. When I tested that material, I was surprised to see how the high and mids of the spectrum was actually pretty well diffused. What's interesting, it's naturally a fire retardant. So it's like perfect to use on an electric instrument with circuitry embedded in it. And it's like farm waste. You're not cutting any trees. You're not damaging anything. You're just using something that was supposed to be trash. And I'm doing a series of 5 electric guitars with it. It's called the Mycocaster. But I did a quick prototype this summer with a uke to see actually how that could work. But let me just give you just a little, I don't know if you can hear it because, yeah. Well, it's not in tune yet. I just like plugged it real quick. The advantage is also the instrument is extremely light. So that's a new advantage as well. What I need to play with next is how to not use broken fiber, but fiber that's still continuous, because that will also help out. So everything that's on my bench is pretty much like work in progress. Besides the mushroom, there's also something that can work for you is using kombucha leather or any vinegar mother. Because it's pure cellulose, it's pure protein. Once dried out, you actually get leather. So it's been used in the fashion industry for a couple of years, but never any recipe I was able to find was appropriate for acoustics. So like, what if we could like figure out a way to just grow leather? Those were early tests that will actually behave like goat skin. And those were the very early gnarly tests in like winter of last year. It's been a full year of experimenting with this. How long to like grow the SCOBY, how quickly to dry it. You can get so radically different results, but after a year, I'm pretty happy that I figured out something that I can actually use on a banjo. Takes about a month to grow and a week to dry. And when you think about how long it will take for a goat to die, to then take that skin, to then treat that skin, and it's just, actually it is faster maybe sometime than waiting for a tree to grow or a goat to, skin to be tanned. I did a quick test also with one of the early skin on a Turkish banjo, because that was smaller and faster built. And since maybe April, this was under tension. It's still working. I broke it on purpose to do some stress tests, and yeah, you can really repair it pretty well as well with just glues that tend to stretch out. The limitation is there's no collagen. So it's how to fight the nature of being brittle with those leathers. Fish leather has been pretty fun. Amanda Hawk is one of my vendors. She's from Brazil, and she makes beautiful tilapia leather that I use on some pickguards or guitar straps. Those also, that was farm waste that was supposed to end up in the trash. And there's a tilapia farm near her, and she decided with her sister to actually use those piles of like dead skin and do something with it. And it's remarkably robust. And again, that was something that was not supposed to be. But my favorite, it's Ray. I don't know if you can see. Ray skin, once sanded, not only is beautiful, but because all the scales are actually pretty close to one another, it's tougher than your nails. So as a replacement for plastic for pick guards, I find it really effective because it's lighter than the plastic. You can sand it to almost that same thickness. But the true advantage for me is the skin between each scale makes it very flexible. So now you have actually a pick guard that will move with the soundboard instead of constraining the soundboard by expanding and contracting with the the motion of the wood. And it's just it's such a pretty material too. Try to think what else. My favorite project currently is something that took me over a year. I don't know if you can see it here. It's actually a guitar that I worked on with bees. I had 6,000 bees that helped me grow a comb just behind the bridge. So that sounds kind of far-fetched, but as I was becoming a beekeeper, I started to notice a lot of similitude between the way they communicate and the way sound travels. They create those shapes naturally to actually, they communicate through vibration in the comb. So basically they 3D print the comb to be acoustically sound. So I'm like, interesting. And if we look also at the different hertz that they are humming at, like, oh, this can boost my bass range. Is that true? So that was just kind of a crazy idea. And I'm glad it worked out because the likelihood that the soundboard will not stay straight, staying 1 year in outdoor, in a hive in New England, knowing the drastic changes of weather we can have between winter and summer. But it pretty much panned out. I have to say, the Nomex is really what stabilized everything. For those who doesn't know, it's actually a honeycomb structure. Turned out it's the same scale as what the natural honeycombs is built out of. That helped me to actually trick the bees into following my blueprint little by little. I underestimated how fast they were filling the combs with honey and larvae, which makes it very heavy. But they actually stopped just at the bridge where they had, and that's pure luck. It's just my mistake of building a hive longer than what actually the population was. So they stopped building because they were like, we're good, we have our food for the winter, we don't need to work anymore. And that was pure luck. So if I try it again, I'm not sure it will work out. And I'm hoping to string it in the next couple days. what was interesting is to use the propolis to fill every cracks. So the few parts that move, such like bracing and anything else, they actually glued it themselves. They did most of the job for me. The bracing was more shaped like a top bar. If you know beekeeping, top bar hives are just a stick with a V profile instead of a frame. So I went for that so they can really shape the scallop, natural, optimal sounding comb. So the bracing was also looking like that. I'm using the excess wax for the finish. Yeah, I can't wait to share with everyone once I have some recordings of it, how it turns out. But so far, when I put my digital pitchfork, I'm already happy with what happened. And if it didn't work, it's okay. It would have been a beautiful collaboration and learning curve. So that's pretty much what I have on my bench currently. So I tend to live more into the prototyping world of lutherie. I also make traditional instruments, but that's where I'm the happiest, is in the searching and figuring out and really having those epiphany moments where you bring a guess to actually a knowledge. It's not guessing anymore, it's actually knowing. And that's pretty much my favorite part. What people don't realize when we see a finished guitar is actually the most of the work is 80%. It's like an iceberg. At the end, we just see the tip of the iceberg. The work that was necessary to get to that point is massive, and that's where all the problem solving is happening. Yeah, I don't know if I took too much time or how we're doing on time.
Oh, that was perfect. That was great. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you.
Let's move on and let's hear from Mishi talk about his work. And I know, Mishi, I'm going to share the images, and just let me know when you want me to do that, when the time is right, and I'll pop those up on the screen for you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Barton. And my name is Michihiro Matsuda, and thank you for inviting this event. I'm very appreciated, and the whole panel is great, so I'm so honored. And today I would like to talk about my latest special project guitar. And yeah, could you put up some image, please? Thank you. Yeah, I wish I can do this in my shop, but my shop got a little bit of Wi-Fi issues, so it's kind of unfortunate. But yeah, thank you, Barton. So this is the latest special project guitar. I finished it beginning of this year. So most of my time I make flat top acoustic guitars, but once a year or twice a year, I make this type of special project guitars. And this particular one is for the guitar shows. And I was excited to join the Holy Grail Guitar Show this spring, but unfortunately, they had to cancel it because of this pandemic. But I was able to, this guitar, able to join Jamie, one of the panel today, and probably he'll talk about more in later. And I was able to join his boutique guitar showcase tour. So this guitar was part of it. And so it is a special project guitar. And there's a three concept. It's a recycle, art, and guitar. And so start with the recycle part. And this top is, when you guys seeing, it's a made out of chopstick. It's a disposable chopstick. You see it when you guys go to a restaurant, in Asian restaurant, you can see those chopsticks, and they are actually used. And I have a friend who's owned the sushi bar here in the local in San Francisco Bay Area, and ask them to collect those chopsticks after the business hours. So yeah, then I can talk about later more about chopstick. And then there's many sub-layers concept recycle and art and guitars, and one of the major concept is using production, recycling the production guitars, and there are many inexpensive guitars in everywhere, and some of them are so it's so inexpensive, which is good, easy to access, and student can get it and start music. But they are so inexpensive, and guitar, well, any guitars, when you maintain it, and if you have a problem when you repair it, it lasts a long time and you can play it. But since most of the production guitars are so inexpensive, when you take it, when you get problem, and when you take it to the repair shops, they may say, well, this guitar, the repair cost may higher than the actual buying new guitars. So there I was, I started thinking how many guitars actually are kind of forgotten or abandoned or like wasted. So that's kind of starting point of thinking about recycling actual productive guitar. And this one is a Les Paul copy guitar, copy model. And I found it in local Craigslist. It's totally broken. And I don't know what's the brand name is. But I thought it's a great material for this project. And there are another other, so this body and neck, they are the like a recycling the productive Les Paul copy guitar. And the sound, the top is face is chopstick, but there's actual soundboard underneath. It's made out of broken piano soundboard. And I found it. There was a stamp on it, and I found it. That's an old piano soundboard. It's around. They are out of business now, but it's called Chicken Piano around Boston area, and very high regarded at the piano factory. And then there was a piece of it. There's a piece of the piano soundboard I recycled. I was able to get a big enough piece for this guitar. And then underneath, then like a triangle thing, you see it. That's kind of like a sound reflector. And this is out of the broken tabletop from actually my house. So then that's a recycle. Then relates the art. And I used the Les Paul, intentionally I used the Les Paul shape copy model. And because I wanted to leave some question. When I'm recycling this shape, which is, this copy guitar is a copy of Les Paul. Then when I make a new guitars, it's going to be the copy of Les Paul. And I wanted to make like a question. So what I'm doing here is, am I just copying Les Paul, or this is artistic expression, or can I say, can I say I'm also recycling established image of Les Paul? So I don't have any answers, but I just leave the question in this guitar. And so that's why I didn't modify the shape of the Les Paul. and I didn't modify. I didn't change those finish, original finish. I think this is not the original finish the factory created. It's the previous owner did it some kind of refinish, but I didn't want to change it, and I wanted to leave it. So that's the art. And what? Oh, then yeah. So relates to it. Yeah, this shape, Les Paul shape. So at the same time, this guitar is a conceptual and also expression, more like expression myself. And most of the time, guitars are made to be like musical genres. So this guitar goes to go fit to the finger style, or this guitar goes to fit the jazz music. This guitar should goes to country music, or etc. But I don't want to have those images on this guitar. So more like neutral. So then contradiction I have on this guitar is using Les Paul shape and neutral, musical neutral image. So that's a kind of challenge because Les Paul shape itself has a very, very strong musical establishment, and I mean, establishment and also very strong images. So I wanted to dilute it, or I wanted to distract it. So that's one of the reasons I choose the chopstick on the face. And also chopstick represent major recycling movement. So I thought it'd be a good fit to this project. And also this construction wise, also I want to have the same reason, dilute Les Paul images. So neck goes through, neck attached to the two beams, and two beams kind of go into the body. This body is hollowed out, and kind of two beams go into this hollowed out body. It's kind of same structure as the banjos. And the back is open, and the top face is chopsticks. And this actually chopsticks is the 3 layers. And each chopstick, of course, I have to wash it and make the thickness first. Then I added a couple graphite reinforcement between layers. Then I tried to make it random, like random layout, and try to show this is chopstick. I wanted to show it. This is the chopstick, and so that's why I leave the sort of recycled figure of the chopsticks. And then underneath, there's an actual soundboard, and it's a flat, and kind of flat top soundboard and braced, and ladder braced. And this soundboard, there's no interference to the top chopstick face. So it moves freely. Then the body is open, and triangular thing is that's a reflector. It's kind of like a banjo's reflector thing. And the bridge is seated on a soundboard, actual soundboard. It goes through the chopstick face. And but then it has a little bit of acoustic component into the sound, but it's an electric instrument. It's got magnetic pickup in it. And okay, what else? Then as a guitar, conception that the guitar is. So it's not the design from the functions. It's kind of opposite. I like the like a DIY culture, DIY or custom made culture in the United States. It's not like when I see like a custom motorcycles or custom cars, and like some cars like a huge engine, so it's kind of sticking out from the front covers, and they are not functioning well, but I see there are attractiveness, and I like those images. Also, I feel more freedom. It's I wanted to have those, yeah, like a freedom into my guitars. So I don't know. So that's why it's more like an expression. I don't know. It's called the design, but this is a special project. So I wanted to make something different and asking people what you think. And this is my project. And yeah, I don't have any secrets to answer questions. So later, so if you have a question, please ask me anything. And thank you for listening.
We did have a few people with questions specifically about this, and we can circle back to them at the end a little bit because there were some good questions. But thank you very much. I love that guitar. Thank you. Appreciate it. Appreciate it. Let's move on to Ken.
Okay. Hello, everyone. I'm happy to be here, and I'm happy to be part of this wonderful group of explorers at the workbench. It's great, my comrades, and wonderful to see so many people are watching. That's great too. So I started making guitars in the 70s, and I got excited about building archtop guitars early on, and threw myself wholeheartedly into it. I'd worked as a machinist and also a furniture maker for some very brilliant people, and learned a lot in my early 20s. And I ended up building some innovative archtop guitars. Here's something that I built in I think I finished this in 1977. It's called the Celestial guitar. It has a bunch of unique features on it, and some of the things that I was doing back then, I'm still doing. For example, the bridge is hollow on this guitar, and the tailpiece is affixed with a ball, because you can see that. And anyway, so it was it was my life's passion and very exciting project for me. But I found it difficult to make a living building archtop guitars. They took so long to make, and I was always doing experiments and trying to figure out how to do it better. And so kind of by default, I moved to electric guitars because there was a much bigger market for them, and there were just as many interesting players to work for. So one of the things that I tried to do right around that time, or early 80s actually, was I tried to see if I could combine some of the things that I liked about acoustic archtop guitars with the electric guitar. And so here's a guitar that I made, I think it's 1985 or something like that. And I don't know if you can get a sense of how thin it is. It's actually, it's so thin that the output jack I turned down on my lathe as far as I could get it. And so, but it still protrudes not only through the top, but through the back of the guitar. So there's hardly any room at all. This edge of the guitar is probably 5 millimeters thick. There's plenty of places where it's less than that, 1/8 of an inch thick or so. Anyway, and it weighs 2 pounds. And it's a good guitar. Anyway, so I liked the challenge of building an electric guitar in a new way. And I thought that some of the things that I'd learned as an acoustic archtop builder were about the role of the neck. Yeah, and it seemed to me that a lot was being said about everything but the neck. People were talking about the bridge, the tailpiece, the plates, and the neck was just a neck. It was made out of mahogany or maple, and who cared? And you put the headstock on it that had your so-called signature shape on it, and it seemed to me that the neck was unexamined largely compared to other things. And so one of the things that seemed obvious to me is that when you play a guitar, your hand, which we could think of as a bag of bones and protoplasm, with some considerable mass connected to a human body, is moving up and down the neck of the guitar, and therefore modifying the guitar in some pretty profound ways by creating nodal points. So when you have guitars that behave badly, say wolf notes or bad notes, dead notes, hot notes, sometimes you could put a capo there and find that, well, gee, that note isn't so bad now, or that note is worse, or whatever. Anyway, it made me think that there was a lot to be explored in the neck. So I started veneering the back of the neck to try and stiffen the neck with a layer of wood. I used maple and ebony, and it was difficult and time consuming, but very effective. And I was excited about the results I was getting. One of the projects that was hot on my bench was the 6-string bass. So if you remember the 80s, or even if you don't, the 6-string bass was kind of a thing, 5- and 6-string basses. And this actually is my first instrument with a carbon fiber reinforcement. It's painted now, but this bass, again, mid 80s, I guess, was, gosh, this is only about 5 pounds, 36-inch scale. Shortest headstock I could figure out how to make with the pegs, the knobs going on both sides. And I built a series of these, and they were quite successful and interesting. And I learned a lot about making necks and reinforcing them with wood, and then moved to carbon fiber. So again, this 2-pound guitar is Douglas fir with a little bit of carbon on it, and worked out very well. I also, part of that project was to develop a modern fingerboard that I know Rochelle and Michi have both talked about recycled materials and usage. So I figured that this was a potential contribution to that, in that we don't need tropical hardwoods to make this. This fingerboard is 0.5 millimeter thick, 20 thousandths thick, and the stainless steel frets are bonded to it. And then it's, they're trimmed and glued to the necks, and they worked very, very well and didn't need to be adjusted. In other words, the technique that we were able to devise to make this is at Parker Guitars now, the techniques that we were able to devise to make these things were so accurate that the frets didn't need to be dressed or fooled around with, which we thought was huge. It was great. And now in my current work, I'm back to acoustic archtops again, and the way the neck is working here, I can show you a little bit about that. This is a square pin that's made largely of carbon fiber, and it goes into a square hole in the body with a clever little piece of hardware that adjusts it for height. And so it adjusts the neck for height this way. I'm just showing you by hand, but it adjusts with a screw. And that allows me to make the bridge without adjusters, without height adjusters in it, which was actually the original design goal for the project. So back up a little bit. When I was building this first guitar I showed you in the mid 70s, I was sharing shop space with a man who built Renaissance lutes. And I learned a lot about historical woodworking lute building and other early instruments from him and his clients. And the lute was really a high-tech Renaissance era solution to the problem of not having an amplifier. So you had these little wimpy strings made out of intestines of animals that really had almost no power and barely worked, really. And you had to use these pretty much terrible strings to get whatever you were going to get out of the instrument. So you had to optimize the efficiency and responsiveness of the instrument as much as you possibly could. And that was done partly by making them really, really thin and light, and partly by making a really stiff and light neck. And so the necks were made of vertical grain softwood, the same quality wood that you would use to make, say, a guitar or piano top. And then they were veneered on the back with a layer of ebony. So that's where my inspiration was. And then they were attached to the neck block of the lute with a big handmade by a blacksmith nail. So the first non-adjustable truss rod. Pretty high-tech thing. And again, this is in the 1500s. So now what I'm doing is I'm combining, see, it might make more sense to do it if I can figure out how, this way. Yeah, now I'm combining a neck core. So this is a vertical grain piece of Douglas fir that's shaped like a neck, only smaller, of course. And then there's a bunch of this magical fiber stuff. This is carbon fiber, and this is a tube. And inside the tube is a spruce pin that makes up this part of the neck. So the carbon fiber goes from the pin up into the neck veneer. A little hard to show everything, but here's the neck veneer blank. And then at the end, it all lays up like this. So you have a piece of Douglas fir core, a piece of material of nice wood on the outside that the player gets to touch and feel. And then in between the core and the veneer on the outside is this smile of carbon fiber, which helps to support everything. Now, one of the big problems in necks is that they can absorb energy in ways that we find very disturbing. And this is why we get wolf notes and bad notes and hot notes and dopey sounding notes. And so the carbon fiber helps to both give the neck tremendous stiffness along the grain to resist the pull and distortion of the strings. And it also gives the neck a huge amount of stiffness in torsion or twisting, so that the neck can't behave in odd oscillations. And to that effect, I've also made the headstock of the guitar as small and stiff as I possibly can so that that can't injure the way that the neck works. Anyway, remember, we've got this structure, we're stringing it up, we're trying to get it to be efficient, reflect energy, and not absorb it. And then when we put our hand on it, we keep modifying it as we change positions on the neck. So anyway, the carbon fiber really does a fantastic job of evening all those things out, supporting the neck properly and making it possible for the guitar to be all that it can be. And I'd like to say that I love explaining this stuff. and I'm happy to tell you all that I will be putting my work life online pretty much, starting at the end of the year, working in concert with the Abraham J. and Phyllis Katz Foundation, who are helping to produce an ongoing series of shop tours, videos, explanations, reasonings, experiments, demonstrations, and a blog to answer questions. So that's what I'm up to.
Awesome. And you're bending those veneers across the grain, the neck veneers that are going over, right?
Yeah. Do you want to talk about that for a second?
Maybe just quickly, yeah, because we do have just a little note, because that's not
Yep.
either.
Okay, so one fabulous trick, and this comes from antiquity, actually from lute making. The body of a lute is only 20 thousandths, again, half a millimeter thick. But after it's all glued together, the builders would glue in some parchment or other fibrous reinforcing. So if they'd had carbon fiber, they probably would have used that or something. This fiber that you can see on the outside of the neck veneer is linen, and it's very thin. They call it handkerchief linen. It's about 8 thousandths of an inch thick, very thin. It's bonded to the outside of a flat piece of material that's 60 thousandths or 1.5 millimeters thick. And it's bonded with as little resin as I can possibly figure out how to use. Anyway, then the inside of the material is wet with a fabulous product, which I believe may have glycerin in it. They won't tell me. It's called Joe's Veneer Softener. And that stuff helps to make the fibers pliant. And then you can bend a flat piece of material, believe it or not, into a shape like this, and it doesn't crack or break. And it doesn't crack or break because the linen, partly because the linen, which you can see is plus or minus 45 degrees, the linen takes the tensile load on the outside of the part, thereby keeping the wood from splitting. And then it's sanded off, so that when you're all done, there's no more linen. Does that answer your question?
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
I love these old sort of, things they've been doing for a long time. We've been doing a lot of work with the conservators in the lab. And so at the Weissman Center, and they've been giving us all sorts of tips on paper and fibers and paper and different ways things relate up. It's been fascinating. And those old tricks that you can incorporate into your work I love that stuff. We have another workshop on Tuesday about that, which is great. Okay.
I want to watch.
Yeah, I'll invite you. You would probably love it. Okay, let's move on to Uli. It is 2 o'clock. We spent a bunch of time, but this is all fascinating. So let's keep going, and we'll have some time save a little bit of time for talking after. We'll go a little bit after 2:30, I think, to make sure we get the discussion happening. So take it away.
So it's an honor for me to support you students in these difficult times of working together only maybe through monitors and microphones. So really, it was a pleasure for me to be invited and to support you in that. I am building guitars since middle 80s and professionally since 88. And my background was mechanical car manufacturing training at Mercedes, and a school degree for a study, but I decided to follow my hobby and make out a profession of that in building electric guitars. So when I started, my approach or my path was first to so to say, to reenact the electric guitars as I knew them, as you could buy them and play them. And I pretty soon came to the point where I realized that I'm limited in what I want to achieve and what I could achieve in, say, in the pool of clients that surrounded me and their desires, their wishes. And so I took the chance or took the decision to study industrial design. So that was always a kind of idea in my back mind, and I didn't have the ability. I didn't have the intention to work as an industrial designer, but I needed a kind of kickstart for my brain, and I studied industrial design from 92 to 96 or 7, and for me it was. And you're in the same situation now, not studying industrial design, but architecture. And for me, it was a very, very mind-opening process when I came from my workbench and from my daily bills that I had to pay through making and repairing guitars to an art school. And an art school which was newly founded and which was not connected with a certain tradition of industrial design. It was a very free and experimental school. So my teacher was an industrial designer, Hartmut Esslinger, the founder of Frog Design. And he was, at that time, he was working, or his office was working on more software and media design. So what we were doing is working on industrial products, but more on conceptual software things. And this was so separate from my mechanical and craftsman's background that it did what it should do. So another thing, when I remember back the study, was the encounter with a professor from Russia, Yuri Avakumov. He was a conceptual architect. And he was a friend of Zaha Hadid, but since he grew up in Russia, there was no way to perform architecture for him. He was a very free and radical spirit, but there was no ground to build in Russia for him. So what he did is like playing chess only in mind, not on a board. He made architecture or architectural ideas not to be built, but just to wash your mind or to free your spirit. So these were the points where I started with my study. And when I have finished ended my study, I came back to my guitar life, because there was a kind of magnetism that pulled me back to guitars. And I never, or in the beginning, I didn't have the idea to work as an industrial designer for other clients than me. And when I came back to guitars, I had the power and the self-esteem to not continue the work that I did until to my study, but to rethink the guitar as such in my small world or with my small answer. So the thinking about the icon of a guitar is a very subtle thing. When we think about guitars, we are very much, and especially with electric guitars, we are very much connected to not a guitar as such. It's even just the outline. So if I say Vivaldi violin, we have all the same image in our mind without any doubt. If I say rock, then we have the same image. It's the outline of the Hard Rock Cafe, for instance. So this is what people who don't play guitar or have no ideas about guitar think when they think about guitars. And the interesting thing is that the electric guitar is an industrial product. So it was not designed on a workbench of a craftsman in an evolutionary process. It was designed in order to make a 6-stringed instruments playing louder to save wages for players and to be able to be played in bigger halls. So this was a very, very condensed and fast process when the electric guitar as such has been evolved. And I think in this process, while the electric guitar has been evolved, when mass media came up, it was a very tight and dense process without the needed breaks of reflection. So since the electric guitar consists of so many elements that lead to a sound or a tone or a performance expression of the instrument, there is a very high likeliness that it is not only possible to build a guitar or to design an electric guitar in the way that we know it is. But think back, the icon of the electric guitar is programmed or is burned into our minds. And this is not negative, but the electric guitar is such the media is the massage or the message, however you want to hear. The electric guitar is undoubtable what we think when I say Vivaldi violin, when I say hard rock guitar, we have the same image in our mind. But if you try to keep this out of your mind and go back to how an electric guitar structurally is made, or if you think you grew up in the Soviet Union and you can't build an electric guitar because the party says it's not allowed to build an electric guitar, then you have to build it in your mind and you will come to a different result probably. And when I came back to electric guitars, I deconstructed the electric guitar into its very simple functional parts and tried to reassemble then these parts in order to make the tonal components, the components that define the tone of a guitar, interchangeable. And constrainingly, this led to a total different form of an electric guitar. And of course, it's not a guitar that we know from the image hard rock cafe or Vivaldi violin. Of course, it's something really different. And when I published this guitar in '95, it was a strong reaction from the audience, because from visitors on a trade show where I showed it, because people were so much connected to the icon of the electric guitar. And in my more contemporary work, this comes closer to me to understand what the iconography of the electric guitar means. And of course, not to fight against the iconography, because I like to use the term of, we think about electric guitars, just think about a 5-pocket jeans. There are some, in the design of, or in the cut of a 5-pocket jeans, there are some modifications possible, but we all know which modifications are not possible. We don't have to talk about that, we know that. It's the same icon, it's the cut, the 5 pockets, and this is your pants. And if you, how should I say, if you think in terms of electric guitars, it's the same thing, since it's an industrial product which has been transduced through so many mass media. The look is programmed, and I would like to show you, just to give you a little overview of what I did. It's this guitar. This guitar is deconstructed. It consists of holding elements that hold the body, which is reduced on 2 wooden cylinders. They are interchangeable with 2 screws on the backside. And the sort of timbre can be different, so the tonal response of the guitar is different. And you have pickups that are slidable here on a bar, and they can be interchanged and unplugged, interchanged by another pickup. And of course, the look of this guitar is very different to the guitars that we all know, but the tone or the functionality of this guitar is pretty much the same like a traditional electric guitar. So this is where I started in '95, and when I show here around in my workshop. There are some other models that are different from electrics as we know. And of course, this has become my how should I say, this has become my order, my personal order to work on guitars, to work on the idol, on the icon. And the older I get, the more I get back to the ancient shapes of an electric of a guitar as such. And so I reconfirm the truth of the 5 pocket genes without any doubt. But the process to come there started in my study in '92. Okay.
Thank you. Yeah, no, that's fascinating. And I feel like speaking about the archetype, each one of you, because I spoke to all of you preemptively before we had our talk, and that was a common theme with everyone, that the idea that there is this form, the shape, or an idea, or maybe tradition. In a lot of my thinking was the difference between the archetype and tradition, and the archetype maybe becomes the visual form that the outside world knows, but the traditional way of making becomes almost the builder's archetype of how to construct it, and breaking through and changing those. Jamie, I want to give you a chance to pop in here if you have some thoughts based on everyone's presentations. If you want to share some of your thoughts, give you a second. And then I'd love to talk about a couple other common themes, especially about inspirations, and because there were a few themes that repeated themselves there as well.
Sure. Again, thank you for having me here, Burton. It's an honor and a privilege. I've been inspired by all of these people for many years, and some of them are good friends, and we live our lives having the same crazy conversations, much about this icon and what you just talked about. I am not a guitar maker like these folks here are. I have built some guitars, but that's not what I do. Really, my work is in furthering the conversation of the guitar, in championing those who are out there, challenging the conceptions of the icon, presenting opportunities for them, bringing them together. And some of my more recent work has really been about exploring those places where the guitar intersects with the other creative disciplines, which is where your and my earliest conversations had started. So I curate shows around the world, and when given the opportunity to be able to bring these two worlds together, like at the last year's Winter NAMM show, for those who aren't aware, it's the largest guitar gathering in the world. About 115,000 people come to California every year for this. I create a space within NAMM, and I've given an opportunity to further the conversation. And last year, I had 2 architectural firms who have guitar projects. One from the Russian Federation with Padalka guitars. Simon and Daria Padalka, a husband and wife, who are both trained architects. Daria also taught in the university, but now they are full-time into guitar making. And Noah Guitars from Milan, who are actually a guitar project from a architectural firm. So they make a few guitars. Otherwise, they occupy themselves with the more expected work of an architect. And this next show, it will be featuring a couple of industrial designers, actually, a couple of industrial design people who, again, further the conversation of what are the commonalities, what is the interest, why has this useful object, this tool, exceeded the bounds of its utility? The icon that Uli talked about, why does the guitar mean something to all of us? It does. In Western culture anyways, we all have a feeling about the guitar. We don't necessarily have a feeling or a relationship with an oboe or a flugelhorn, but we do about the guitar. And so it's a part of our culture. And much of my work is in furthering these conversations, and every one of the people on this panel here have been a key in those conversations, and have taken courage, because it takes courage to step out there. Yes, you have fans who will champion what you're doing, but Well, perhaps appropriately to quote a Danish architect here, Bjarke Engels, said, when you go beyond indifferent, you'll awaken a response in both extremes. And we've absolutely seen that. I remember the first time I interacted with Uli Teufel's guitars in the press, in the mainstream media. I had never seen such a harsh reaction before. We had 50% thumbs up and 50% thumbs down. I've never seen that, and embodied that. 50% said, that's amazing, that's incredible. 50% said, that's ridiculous. And so it takes a courage to do what every one of these people are doing by challenging the icon. So I'm here and hopefully can contribute something to your conversation as it carries on, but that's my main work.
I would like to, keeping that going with the idea of the archetype, I'd like to a question for Michi, because with Uli and Ken, and even with Rochelle, I can understand there's, material problems that lend themselves, and I can see, not see, but understand the design thinking and viewing it as a problem, maybe as a deconstruction, or there's performative aspects of what I'm doing that lend a certain style of making to make more sense, or new materials, of course, might lead to new ways of making. But Michi's approach to me is much more organic, and the idea of open-ended questions. And when I first saw your work, Michi, I was immediately brought back to the art world. In your rosettes, that brought me back to suprematist painting, Malevich and Kandinsky and Lisitsky. And I don't know that that was a reference for you, but in my mind, I made this connection. And I realized when I think about your work, there's certainly structural stuff going on, but I use almost my art school language to think about it, in that you've created an aesthetic that is recognizably your own, but motifs repeat, but they're not the same. And if you could just talk for a sec about, because you mentioned to me when we talked about breaking the archetype in terms of, and you mentioned a little bit about it before, but in terms of the aesthetic of your instruments, if you could just speak to that for a sec, the forms that are recognizable, I think.
Archetypes. Yes, it's very, this guitar business is, I agree with Uri's statement a lot, and I very relate to it. And sort of that music is interesting, and composer makes like very, very avant-garde, like when you say contemporary 20th centuries or 21st centuries music, and some music has no sound for minutes 33 seconds or something. But the music, when you see the instruments, even though there's no sound, originally the composition made for piano. I don't know, is that correct? Right. And there are some, but music instrument-wise, is, even though music is very no boundaries, but music instrument is still in a tradition. And yeah, that actually very interesting. Means people probably need some kind of foundation to build up imaginations. And like Uri's story, it's very interesting, like electric guitars, it was probably that was the instrument for rebel or anti-authorities when you started like 50s and 60s. And it's kind of like with the positive feedbacks, and all rock musicians, pop musicians, jazz musicians start using those instruments and created whole cultures. Now the all like archetypes, guitars, and like I said, dreadnought, Les Pauls, and all archetypes becoming the authorities. And kind of funny is to see that those anti-authority instrument now is becoming the authority. And yeah, but it's not good or bad. That's probably we are seeing is one of the, we are seeing how that tradition is building up. So it's not good and bad, but for ours, tries to create something different there's a hint in it. So that's what I see.
Thank you. Another question that I had, or way of thinking, a bunch of you, Jamie and I spoke about Raymond Loewy in terms of, industrial design from the 20th century. I know that Uli studied under Hartmut, and one of my first memories of Ken as well was a quote that he had from William Stout. And so we have these designers who have influenced, what we see, how we see products or things like that out in the world. And when I think about the guitar, we look at it, but to the player, that becomes, personal, and you take that mass marketing and it sort of goes away once it's in your lap and it becomes an object. So speaking spatially and personally about the sort of human interaction with the guitar, how do you approach those ideas in your work in terms of, we would probably call it ergonomics, but I imagine as builders, you're thinking about it more personally than theoretically when you're building something that will be an integral part or a tool that's meant to be handled and touched. Ken, you mentioned, you touched on this a little bit with the influence of the player on how the guitar works, but I'm wondering if anyone else has thoughts on that.
Well, I think the guitar came from many other instruments, and over centuries it developed, and builders and musicians worked together to try and create the best possible tool for making music with the materials and techniques that they had at their disposal at the time, whatever those were. And I think that ergonomics basically has guided this thing all the way from the beginning. And so when you have the modern classical guitar kind of evolving out of previous instruments in the late 19th century, and then you look at modern classical guitars now, from across the room, they're the same thing. Certainly there have been innovations and changes in instrument design in the last 100 years, but you can't see them. And I think partly it's because there's a tendency in design for things to reach an evolutionary phase that it's hard to improve on. And for example, when I was designing the fly guitar, I had a piece of vellum over a Stratocaster. And I knew that if I went too far away from the cues in that guitar, that I would fail as a designer. So part of that is how we're proportioned. You have to design something that a small person and a large person alike can both relate to. And that's always a challenge in design, furniture design as well, say. But if you stray too far, you'll create an object that people find foreign and difficult. And as I say, I think it's, this is really centuries of development, bringing us to what's a good neck shape, what's a good scale length, what's a good string spacing at the bridge. These things are not that different from one of our instruments to another. You could line up an awful lot of different guitars, and the spacing at the nut and the spacing at the bridge would be pretty darn close. So there's some of that.
Rochelle, did you have something you want to speak to that?
Yeah, but actually Ken covered it well. It was like the one size fit all versus like designing for just one person. And we have to be able to address both at the same time, which is kind of contradictory in some ways. But in my experience, I deal more with the made to order, one of a kind. So over the years, I catch myself now, I have a 20-question survey of the customer's habit. Do you play standing or sitting? Because that can be more crucial on like some weights distribution. Are you going to travel a lot with a guitar? Is that going to stay at the studio? That also will influence a lot of decisions. You're building a life companion to that person. So really like to know that you have to really thoroughly like list a lot of factors. So you actually address that. And ergonomics is like most of the concern at first. But yeah, sorry, but I pretty much wanted to say the same as Ken.
Jamie, you're muted.
Could I add something to the conversation here that's perhaps a slightly different sort of part of this conversation is I've noted within my sort of philosophies and work about the guitar is that we have this feeling like the guitar is solidified, like there is the icon that we talk about and that it's very difficult to stray from it. But actually, historically, the guitar has constantly evolved. And despite popular opinion, the guitar is what the guitar is, there's actually no historical evidence to support it. In the first 100 years that we talk about where Ken began with the modern classical guitar, which now all classical guitars look like, with the work of, let's say, Torres in around 1850 to 1950, there are 10 distinct variations of the guitar that are still made today. If we look at the classical guitar, the flamenco guitar, the archtop guitar, the Rezophonic guitar, the Hawaiian guitar, the lap steel, the pedal steel, the electric solid body guitar, they all happened in the first 100 years, and it didn't stop there. They continued to evolve. Now, popular opinion as to what's accepted has a different arc as to where the evolution of the instrument is concerned. But I'm out on the road with these people's instruments. For those who don't know, I travel around the world with the guitar, with Mishi's guitar that he showed there, and I've traveled with Uli's guitars, and I see live people interacting with them. And the ideas that people have about what is normal, what isn't normal, what's acceptable, what isn't acceptable, it changes and it continues to evolve. And it seems to be that every generation has their idea of what a guitar is, just like we have an idea of what is cool and what music is or what fashion is. You know, the Les Paul, the iconic guitar that we've already talked about here, was a commercial failure. The people didn't accept it. They had to stop making it. And they invented another very famous model now, the ES335, because the Les Paul was deemed to be too small and too heavy for people who were used to playing larger archtop guitars. And so they tried to right their sales by saying, okay, those archtop jazz players are asking for a bigger guitar. They don't want this new little guitar. But it was actually the players, the culture, who ultimately decided. And there were some kids over in England, which are now old men, Jimmy Page and Eric Clapton, who were taking that guitar that was designed for one purpose, and they did something that we never expected with it. And they decided what that guitar was going to be, but it was a completely unintended consequence. If we look at that guitar for its designed purpose, as designers in the conversation of design here, it failed as a design, but culturally was taken somewhere completely different. And when I look at the history of the guitar, that is the story over and over and over again, that we have an idea with designers about what we're trying to do. The Rezophonic guitar was made to be a jazz guitar that could be heard over top of the horns. Nobody associates a dobro with a jazz band at this point, but it somehow made its way into the Appalachian Mountains and became bluegrass. It made its way down to the Mississippi Delta and became Delta blues, probably because they didn't want them, they were cheap. And hillbillies and people down in the Delta could afford them and make different music out of it. But ultimately the people decided. And I'm curious as to how many other design disciplines deal with such random acts where they design it for one thing and people take it and do something completely unexpected. And they go through these curves of acceptance where it's flatly denied, nobody wants it, and then all of a sudden out of nowhere it comes and spikes up again. End rant.
That's really an interesting point, Jamie. That's a great point. And there's all kinds of corollaries to that. I mean, if you think about the Telecaster, I mean, that was designed for a certain kind of music with just a few beta testers. I mean, there were only a couple of guys with input back then. And then all of a sudden it's being used by, you know, everybody from Ed Bickert, who's one of the finest jazz guitar players ever, and Roy Buchanan, or, you know, who everybody plays a
Top
Telecaster.
5 from Marilyn Manson. Everything. Oh, so sorry. I said, or John 5 from Marilyn Manson, a scary hard
sure.
using same thing.
Yeah. So it's also an interesting thing to think about. What else in our daily lives was designed? What appliance in our daily lives was designed in the 1950s that is still exactly the same? I would submit not a darn thing. You know, I mean, we still use forks. They're a lot older. They're from the 1600s, but things that were designed as kind of popular products. I mean, the Telecaster was a product. It was designed to make people rich. It wasn't designed to make Jimi Hendrix happy, you know, but then it went on to have this life of its own. Most folks don't know that when the Stratocaster was introduced, Leo Fender thought people would throw their Telecasters in the dumpsters because he felt it was such a superior design, and was dumbfounded when they sold in roughly equal numbers. So yeah, to your point, once you design one of these gizmos, you're really never quite sure whose lap it's going to end up in. It's a great thing about guitar making.
Yeah. Some of the questions and comments here, you know, are echoing that idea that talking about the guitar as less about an object or a product and more about a relationship, and how something can resonate with one person and not another, or it's built for one person to their exact specifications maybe, and just fails to connect, but with someone else, it does. And that when you're, I guess I'm extrapolating a little bit from the question, but in terms of thinking about the same instrument appealing and sounding completely different with different players, how much sort of energy do you put into imagining the client with the guitar? Is it a series of specs and you meet those and then you pass it off and it's assumed it's right? Or is there some sort of emotional attachment that goes in from your side towards the person you're making it for? Yeah, Rochelle.
I made one of my best friendships just like communicating on like the progress of the instrument, and when you work every day on an instrument that's for someone, it's hard not to think about like that person. So it's really a human adventure on top of being design work. And yeah, at the end of the day, it's really the human factor that's at the center of the project. So I don't know if that answered the question, but it's more than just a series of things to meet. You're building something that will be very meaningful for that person. So you want to take also other aspects. Communication is key. Yeah.
Relationship goals, yeah. Another question we had was referencing, let me find it here. Maybe a quick question that can be answered to Ken. With your neck construction, do you have different molds for changing the shape if a player is requesting maybe an offset center or a thinner neck? Do you have those made up, or are you able to make them quickly?
Well, the mold that I made allows me to get a lot of variety by I made it so that it could be expanded a little bit if need be for different neck widths. I can change the neck core, and the mold is deep, so I can make different depth necks. So I tried to anticipate that. The molds, I made the mold by hand on my non-CNC Bridgeport milling machine, and you know, a big aluminum tube sanding stick, and it took forever. I'm not looking forward to making a lot of new neck molds, but I do have I can offer a lot of variety of neck shapes. So that was part of the plan. It's worked out pretty well. Probably couldn't do a really big, deep, extreme V, but I'd figure it out.
Yeah. And another quick question here for Rochelle. What type of mushroom are you using on your mycelium block?
Strand that's from upstate New York. And there's this wonderful company that's called Ecovative, and they have different type of strands, and I'm using one of theirs. And that's the strand that actually gets me the acoustics. They have others that will make the structure more flexible, some other that are designed to replace bacon, some others, I mean, they go in like wild directions from that very one material. But yeah, they do have a strand that's ideal for what I'm trying to achieve. And it's not that far, and it's even, so it's pretty great. So I hope that answered the question.
No, that was great. And then another topic that's in here that I think is going to be kind of a hard, very broad, but this is something that I think about a lot, but I don't want to put my own thoughts in here. Is how do you imagine art and music and engineering? How do you all imagine those combining? How do you think about that when you're making your work? And I guess the artistic element of it, or how does that come in? I think that's a tricky question, but maybe there's not an answer.
Oh yeah, there is. Sure there is. Well, the engineering is in service of the art. So if I want to design something and I don't have the materials or the knowledge or the tools that I need to achieve it, I try some embodiment of my idea and it fails, or it doesn't meet my expectations somehow, well, then I go ask experts and try and figure it out. I go read books. Now we have an internet, didn't have that for a long time. I can ask that and find out how other people are handling the material, or what, you know, what mechanical properties might be available in a material I'm unfamiliar with. So sure, I mean, it's really in service of the art, the engineering is. It's not, I mean, it is a funny question, and in a way, maybe it is unanswerable. There's a lot of discussion and talk about this, of course. I've even heard people say that if Antonio Stradivari could have bought Norton sandpaper, he wouldn't have. And I just think that's ridiculous. I mean, every craftsperson uses every arrow we can get to try and hit the target, and you just use what you get. So maybe there's one more thing I want to say, which is that it would be sad if our new tools and capabilities, and I'm talking about CNC machines, laser cutters, you know, computer guided anything, 3D printers, if those were to discourage young people from the big, beautiful, heartbreaking journey of learning how to build things with your hands, I think that would be a tragedy. And I hope that as a species, we can continue to challenge ourselves to combine the strength of our minds with the strength of our bodies to fabricate things with our hands. So that's what I hope, and that's what I hope to be able to contribute to.
Rochelle, go ahead.
Yeah, no, it's funny because that's a very conversation I often have with my students. And because at school at RISD, we have access to 3D printers, laser cutters, is doing a re-questioning, like, when do you need it versus when you don't need it? So if I see that your file is just a bunch of lines and strips and squares, I'm like, no, you're not using the laser for that. It's like, what can you use the robot for that there's no way you could have done it otherwise? And then I think that can avoid that dilemma of maybe not having people stopping, people not working with their hands anymore, is just to question when to use those tools or not. Because those are great tools in the arsenal. But it's making sure that, it's not by laziness then we use them, and really because that's the only tool to achieve that. Yeah. And honestly, like, I just started to build like my CNC machine. I'm looking forward to like not damage my hands and use my hands longer. So somehow like that robot is actually helping me to like be able to work with my hands in 40 years, So yeah, it's can save my hands too. So I'm not completely like against the robots if they are here to really help us. We so need to think with our hands because as soon as we touch material, there's so much information we get from it. How it's going to break, how much torque it has. I mean, we live in the material world like since the moment we're on Earth. So we have more empiric knowledge than we want to admit. So just by manipulation, already you can make design decision and process decision that you would not have if it was still just two-dimensional. So yeah, there's nothing like working with our hands. I totally agree.
Yeah, we had a project, and this talk reminds me so much of that. It was a thesis project, and she was working with wood bending, and she wanted to use the robot to automate it. And she put in so much work. It was really, an amazing process. She built a couple different end effectors, different ways for it to slide as you were moving the wood, and just didn't quite get to the material, the full material aspect. And so her final presentation, everything was up on the wall, and you could just see it was like this is run out in a piece of wood. They all broke in the same place, and it was just getting to the point where you were touching it and feeling that happen before you did it didn't happen. The getting deep down in the material, it was really a technological process that ignored a material property, and that would have come if everything is truncated. That certainly would have happened. There's no way that she wouldn't have been successful in the future, but that material aspect was what didn't quite make it into the initial response. Jamie, go ahead.
Well, frankly, not to put you on the spot, Uli, but you did a talk on CNC as the camera Obscura at the European Guitar Builders Symposium a couple of years ago. I think that your perspective on the CNC and what it contributes to your work is very different than the normal conversation we hear about this subject. And I would encourage you to interject.
Well, I'm working with CNCs since about 15 years, and I explored the possibilities of CNC manufacturing from the perspective of copy pasting things, because if you look at the build time in total of an electric guitar, say the cutting of a machine can save you, maybe on an electric, can save you 2 hours of hand routing on a pin router. So, and when I build a guitar, I'm talking about 80 to 100 hours. So that doesn't save much time. But the CNC machine gives me abilities to do things that I can't do by hand. For instance, so I'm working with a 5-axis CNC machine, and that means I can work in very complex 3-dimensional spheres where I can use different work planes in the space in order to apply control elements or things like that. But this is when I think about CNC, it allows you. Let me give you another example. If you look at photography from the 70s and 80s and photography of nowadays, there is so much of, let's call it 5-axis energy and power behind those very simple Instagram filters, but they make the pictures look like no one could have done this in the 70s with the analog chemical work on photography. So this is what happens with CNC when I design my guitars. But I'm very, very keen on my handwork because the handwork, so the more I work with CNC, the more I started to invest time or to focus on time that I can do by hand. And it even ends up that I desperately look for, couldn't I do this better? Because it will take me longer. And when I work on handworks, like working with my 200 different sanding blocks, I used to listen to audiobooks. And this is a very good link because you don't want to stop to listen to the audiobook. So you try to expand your work as long as possible. And this is a kind of meditational process. So it's a contradiction. On the one hand side, I have the machine that, so people could say, it's a 3-shift machine and he saves a lot of time with the machine, but I justify this with 10 timing this saving of time by little handwork and benefiting me by listening to audiobooks at that moment.
Great.
So when Jamie mentioned the camera obscura, it's the right expression. If you look back into art history, there are paintings from the 17th century or 16th century where you see that it's too complicated for just the traditional. I mean, they explored the central perspective in the Renaissance, and since architects and painters explored the central perspective, they had the key, so to say, the formula for what reality in our brain through our eyes is. But the more interesting thing for me was not the discovery of the central perspective. It was more the camera obscura, which is just a simple application of the central perspective and through a very analog thing. I mean, you don't have to be good in maths. You just have to stick a little hole into something dark and look through this hole, or let the light get through this hole and start to paint after the lines of the light. And this led to a kind of Instagram look in, for instance, the paintings of Van Meer. So they look like our photos today. So if you go and travel Airbnb and shot with your iPhone, shot just the skyline of Delft, it's the same look as Van Meer painted it in 350 years ago. And this is the fascinating thing on that, is that it's so unintentionally, so unspectacular, because it looks so normal. So this is the thing that I like on CNC, that you can do things. People know that it's, of course, it's there because they have cars, they have mixers, they have hair dryers, which are all looking industrial produced. So it's not very spectacular to build guitars like that. But if you would show it to the craftsmen, to the craftspeople of, say, 60 years ago, they would say, "Oh, what the heck did he do?" Because the machines were not there.
Fascinating. Thank you. We are out of time, really. It's almost 3 o'clock. This went by fast, as was expected. Does anyone have any final words they want to say before we close down? Any final thoughts? I feel like that was a pretty apt final thought. If we're talking about archetypes, and there's a new industrial archetype that exists, but
I would say a little something just to the students. Well, anyone out there who's listening, I guess. I work with a number of artisans around the world about developing a unique world-class product to work on the world stage. And frankly, what I find is most useful to share with everyone is that every one of these unique world-class artists who are in this conversation right now, what they produce is absolutely consistent with who they are as people. And that you don't have to find the next brilliant idea out there. Actually, it's about being introspective and being honest with what you find with who you are, and then having the courage to share that with the world. Each person is unique, therefore you will end up with a unique something, a unique offering in the world. And so have the courage to be who you are and share it with the world.
Well put. Beautiful.
okay, I think we're gonna close it down. Thank you so much, everyone. This was wonderful. I appreciate so much you all taking the time, both beforehand and during this, and sharing your thoughts. And this was everything I hoped it could be. I really appreciate all of you joining me today. Thank you so much.
Great. Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.